Tonight on Broadcasting Buffalo, prisons across New York State dealing with striking corrections officers. We'll take a deeper look. Broadcasting Buffalo starts right here, right now. Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Igo with Broadcasting Buffalo. You know, the HALT Act was signed in 2022 to ensure prisoners' health and safety in New York State. But many corrections officers feel it's actually limited their capabilities. It's one of many reasons why officers decided to walk off the job last month. Becca Kupchak has more on the HALT Act and its effect on the prisons.
The HALT Act took effect in New York State in 2022. It stands for Humane Alternative to Long-Term Solitary Confinement. It limits corrections officers' ability to put inmates into solitary confinement as a punishment.
It's taken away their ability as corrections officers to enforce the rules and to disincentivize bad behavior. There are no consequences to bad actions inside a prison anymore in this state.
The COs are protesting the HALT Act and what they say are unfair working conditions. Staffing shortages have led to some officers working 24 to 48-hour shifts.
The recent Collins Correctional Facility lockdown is just a preview of coming attractions if people in Albany don't wake up and address the staffing demands immediately. It is completely unacceptable to run a prison system with corrections officers who are on 24, 32, 48-hour shifts. These are dangerous work practices, and they've been made worse by the New York State HALT Act.
These strikes were not authorized by the New York State prison guard union leaders. It is illegal for state workers to strike under the Taylor Law.
We've had to start legal proceedings against these individuals. Not something I ever would want to do, but I have a law to enforce. We've also let them know that if you are striking, your AWL, you no longer secure the right to have health benefits from the state.
The guards have been on strike since February 17th. The National Guard has been called in to prisons across the state to secure the facilities.
The incarcerated population was left unguarded. There were people from other unions, people who work in healthcare, and the commissary, who were left unprotected by these actions. Thank God for the National Guard that are in there doing work that they never anticipated, and the condition inside the prisons is stabilized.
On February 27th, a tentative agreement to end the strike with the officers took place. 8,000 correctional officers are still on strike. 2,000 staff went back to work according to the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. A handful have been fired with more terminations to be expected. For more information about the HALT Act or the strike, visit our website at broadcastingbuffalo.com. In Buffalo, I'm Becca Kupchak.
Thank you, Becca. After this commercial break, we'll be talking to a co-director of the HALT Solitary Campaign, an attorney who represents inmates, and a retired state Supreme Court justice. Stay with us, everybody.
Hello, Buffalo. I'm Ed Asner. You may remember me as television's no-nonsense news director Lou Grant. And if you think about it, journalists provide us with our first draft of history. Right here in Buffalo, more than 50 years of TV news coverage is being brought back to life. Local stations are working with the Buffalo Broadcasters Association to bring back the stories that helped define the Niagara frontier.
The Pheasant Lane neighborhood, where drifts reach to the rooftops.
It's called the Archive Project, and I support it with all my heart. So should you.
Experience Buffalo and Erie County's unique stories with the new Buffalo History Museum podcast. Connect with Western New York's history as you listen to detailed narratives about heritage, architecture, business, innovation, and significant events and people throughout time. The podcast takes inspiration from the museum's collection and beyond, from experts on staff and featured guests. From the 1918 influenza to F. Scott Fitzgerald, experience the stories that make up our region. The Buffalo History Museum podcast. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Broadcasting Buffalo, everybody. I'm Mike Igo. Tonight we're talking to a former Supreme Court Justice, Penny Wolfgang. She's retired from the state Supreme Court. Attorney Robert Fogg and Jerome Wright, a former inmate and also the co-director of the Hope Campaign. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
I guess it's obvious we should start with the judge. So, Judge, what are your concerns about this whole situation?
I don't know if it's obvious, but thank you.
Obvious to me, anyway.
I think it brings up an issue that's very important to the criminal justice system. The relationship between how we treat people who are incarcerated and the people who have the responsibility to take care of them, watch over them, take care of their safety and the safety of the community, the corrections officers.
Okay, Robert Fogg, you've represented many inmates from what I understand. How about your perspective on this whole situation?
Well, at this present time, I'm getting a lot of calls from inmates who are actually stating that they're not getting their medication or they're not getting some sort of provisions that they need. And usually what happens is they'll put in a chit, they'll ask for or make a request, but they're saying that there's nobody there to receive it, and that's due to the shortage right now. So the shortage itself is having a major disruption in the prison cells and in the facility itself. But this is just part of what has to be right now, I do believe. Just as the judge stated, there has to be that balance between the inmates and the personnel and the correction officers. I do believe they have a valid point. Whether or not this is a proper way to go about it, it's a different story. The HALT Act was an issue, is an issue, but I don't think it's that much of the issue as everyone might like it to be. I believe the HALT Act creates a burden on the facility, a burden of personnel, of rooms, and policies and programs that I don't think the correction officers or the prisons can actually handle. And I think that might be a major issue there.
Good, Jerome, the HALT Act and its enforcement or lack thereof is your baby. How about your perspective, especially since you were also an inmate one time? Give us your perspectives, please.
Well, the whole idea behind solitary confinement has been traditionally to lock people in a cell and leave them there for 23 hours and provide them with 1 hour of recreation. That has been not effective in doing anything to curb violence, to promote safety, to do any things that they say that they're complaining about. I would submit that the HALT Act was enacted in order to protect the lives of both staff and incarcerated people. And it does that by not allowing the most vulnerable people, like those with mental health issues, to be placed in solitary. The misconception about it is that it's a 15 days and you get out of jail free card. That is patently not the case.
Okay, one thing I'm hearing all of you say, we've got to have a balancing act here, because at least in theory, the HALT Act is designed to do some good things, but the correction officers think it's doing bad things. Let's hear from each of you what you think. How can we achieve the balancing act, or is it just a pie in the sky type dream?
Well, there's a lot of misconception, I think, about what solitary confinement, quote unquote, means. Originally, I think there was an abuse of solitary confinement, which is why using it as a disciplinary measure, which is why this act was passed years ago. Now, whether this is still true, I don't know, because they talk about the fact that we're exaggerating what it means to be in solitary confinement, that actually the person who is punished and put in solitary confinement has exercise time, has this regular food that the other people get, that it's not as draconian as people made it out to be. But I don't know. I mean, like we're going to say 100 times, it's a question of balancing, using it judiciously, to use that term, for punishment or for, to have some kind of deterrence for violence against corrections officers and inmates among themselves. That was one of the problems. And if we don't have that kind of ability, what do we have instead? What do they have instead for discipline?
Sure. How about some short takes from both of you, Robert and Jerome?
I would say that we have to listen to the correction officers. We need to actually be inside and see what's going on, how they feel, what's their major issue when it comes to solitary confinement, disciplinary policies and procedures. We need to know that. We need to know the safety risks. We need to also understand, because we do have plenty of studies on the effect of solitary confinement on an individual's psyche, and it's well documented. But at the same time, we need to understand where the correction officers come in and how it affects them. How does it tie their hands? And I think it's just a matter of getting in and sitting down and listening.
Jerome. Where do we begin, right?
No, because there's people talk, solitary halt is the law. When I broke the law, I suffered the consequence. Why is everybody else now allowed to break the law and nothing happens? Halt is the law. When do we decide what laws we're going to follow, what laws we're not going to follow, whether they're convenient, inconvenient? A supermajority of the state legislature voted for halt, passed halt, signed by the governor. Where do we get the opportunity to abrogate the law? They've never fully implemented halt from the moment, and it was signed in 2021. It's supposed to go into effect in 2022. We're in 2025 now, and we're still talking about it not being implemented. If they had implemented the halt with the letter and spirit of the law, like many other jurisdictions who use that model, they would have seen it would have been better safety for both those incarcerated people and the staff.
All right, I tell you, we have another perspective we're going to share with you right now. A little video from the former Erie County Sheriff, Patrick Gallivan. And State Senator Patrick Gallivan is a former sheriff in Erie County, and he shares his thoughts on the HALT Act.
Many things that led to the strike. One of the more significant things, though, is the HALT Act, which essentially severely limits, they call it solitary confinement, but it really is segregated confinement. An inmate is not alone. It's not a whole, like you might think of when you see the Shawshank Redemption or something like that. But essentially what this bill did that has led to the frustration and helped to lead to the dangerous conditions, it's taken away a disciplinary tool from correction officers so that they don't have any means available to them to help them keep order within the facility, whether it's in a housing unit, whether it's out in the yard, whether it's in a recreation area, or wherever it might be. And we make the comparison to, say, a teacher in a classroom. A teacher in a classroom has tools available to them in dealing with an unruly student who's not following the rules. I don't know exactly what they are, but they can refer them to the principal. They can have them removed from the classroom, in-school suspension, and so on. A parent can give a child a timeout. But in this case, any tool that correction officers used to have is extremely limited. And that, along with many other things, some other permissive policies, severe understaffing, among other things, led us to this point that just complete and utter frustration. I would say I've been in or touched the criminal justice system for over 40 years now. And I can say unequivocally that prisons are more unsafe than any time in my adult life. They're unsafe for correction officers and for inmates as well. And in my view, until we see changes in the HALT Act, the strike doesn't get resolved. It's unfortunate that it's come to the point that it has. And we're starting to see terminations, the loss of health insurance, families hurt and things of that nature. But the terminations and the loss of health insurance and the sanctions against correction officers do not make prisons any safer. The more terminations we have, the more acute, more severe the understaffing is. The HALT Act was an act of the legislature. The legislature is the only one that can provide for the permanent solution. But in the meantime, and I think the legislature should change the HALT Act, if not repeal it, change it so that they can provide the correction officers with tools to effectively keep order in a facility. But in the meantime, the governor does have authority. The governor can declare a state of emergency. The governor can can suspend laws during the state of emergency. My thought is she should declare a state of emergency, suspend the HALT Act, implement body scanning for everybody in and out of the various facilities, implement better mail screening procedures to keep drugs out of the facilities, and then have a discussion. I mean, legitimately talk and listen to the people who do the job in an effort to ensure that our prisons are safe for everybody, for the correction officers and for the inmates. We've got a lot of correction officers across the state disenchanted with their union, NYSCOBA, but yet at the same time, NYSCOBA is their representative organization and the only one that can lawfully bargain in good faith with the governor's office. So it is going to take people coming together. In my view, the governor as the executive is the one that can move things along by reaching out, by ensuring that there's discussions, by legitimately listening to the people who are on the job and trying to resolve the concerns that they have.
We're going to take a short break, everybody. Broadcasting Buffalo. We'll be right back.
I wrote a letter to my younger self in order to paint portraits of future possibilities. I wrote, "Dear little me, I want you to imagine a place to get a glimpse of the glistening lights that will emerge to support you. You will not have all of what you need, but just enough grit, grind, and grace to say yes. Imagine a place where individuals put action behind their words. Imagine a place of connections that coach your confidence. Let Buffalo State be the place where you win."
Hello, Buffalo. I'm Ed Asner. You may remember me as television's no-nonsense news director Lou Grant. And if you think about it, journalists provide us with our first draft of history. Right here in Buffalo, more than 50 years of TV news coverage is being brought back to life. Local stations are working with the Buffalo Broadcasters Association to bring back the stories that help define the Niagara frontier.
The Pheasant Lane neighborhood, where drifts reach to the rooftops.
It's called the Archive Project, and I support it with all my heart. So should you.
Welcome back to Broadcasting Buffalo, everybody. I'm Mike Igo. Caleb Abula spoke to a former corrections officer and a former inmate about the strike. Here's his report.
Correction officers across New York State have been on strike for over 2 weeks. We spoke to a former corrections officer and a former inmate on their perspective. Correction officers in New York State say they've been working in unfair conditions for years. On February 17th, they went on strike. Taylor Roberts is a former corrections officer. He drove 200 miles to support what many believe is a justified strike.
There's several reasons. The working environment is atrocious. People are getting mandated to work 24 hours straight. There's no punishment for bad behavior due to the HALT law.
Pastor James Giles is a former inmate. He believes the HALT Act is necessary to protect inmates from inhumane treatment.
We're human beings, we're not actually created, developed, formed to really be in a cage at any time. We have this thing called imagination and things that go on inside of us, feelings and emotions. And
both Giles and Roberts are concerned about conditions across prisons in New York State as correction officers continue to strike.
So the conditions are going to be much worse than what they normally would be, because now they don't have anyone attending. They don't have the necessary manpower or woman power, to attend to some much needed services that individuals have that are incarcerated.
If you would like to see unedited versions of these interviews, visit our website at broadcastingbuffalo.com. In Buffalo, I'm Caleb Abula.
Thank you, Caleb, for your report. Well, Judge Wolfgang, Robert Fogg, and Jerome Wright are still with us to talk more about this. And it seems we've got two things going on here. We got the HALT Act on the one hand, and we have the Taylor Act, which says you can't strike. So what's the balancing act on these two competing interests there?
There's no balancing act. The Taylor law was put in place because there are certain jobs that if people walk off on strike, they're putting people at risk of their lives. That's why that law was made. Just like the HALT law was made, because it risked people's lives. And they violated that. Let's make no mistake about this. This whole strike is a subterfuge. It is to take the spotlight away from the lynching and beating death of Robert Brooks that was caught on film. Because they just got a contract, and they didn't bring up HALT then. But the actual week of the unsealing of the indictments and the arraignment of the officers is when they decided to go out on strike and make HALT the reason.
So push came to shove, basically.
What happens is there was no shove. They never implemented HALT fully, and then they knew that death was going to generate a lot of criminal justice bills, and this is a way to detract from that.
Robert, you have represented many inmates. Probably don't even know how many, right? Or do you?
No, I don't know how many.
That's okay.
I do not know
Lots
how
of
many.
legal cases.
Right. But in the jail, it's a different life. It's not like we know here on the street. There's different moral codes. There's different behaviors that have to be, and the correction officers are also part of that atmosphere. We out here could say whatever we got to say, but for people who have been there, they will know more than we do. As far as the Taylor Act, well, we already know this is an illegal strike, and it's a wildcat strike, which means that it's not sponsored by the union itself.
That's a very good point to make.
Right.
The union did not sanction this.
That's
yet.
right. So this is something that has kind of like grown, and it's grown across the state. But it's for a good reason. Suspicious time maybe, but it's for a good reason. We're talking about overtime. We're talking about correction officers working mandatory 24-hour shifts. We're talking about them actually doing too much work, too much time, and not coming home and staying quality time at home. So there has to be a balance there as well. There's also the dangers of being in a prison and in an institution where everything's ready to blow. So there has to be some protections there. But at the same time, just as the HALT Act says, it must be humane. The thing about the HALT Act, it does more than just talk about solitary confinement. It talks about servicing people with mental health, serious mental health disabilities, and how to protect them, how to protect the officers and things like that. There's only one little issue there. There's one paragraph, I think it's 6DI or something, that talks about how long someone can be confined in solitary confinement. And that in and of itself, the burdens that the law puts on the institution requires manpower, requires staff. It actually requires separate rooms. So this is something that has to be addressed, and I do believe that, I know this is a sticking point, but because of this, they're coming together. I think there's a memorandum of understanding, or at least an agreement that they have, and they're going to put forth some sort of review of what's going on and what policies, what procedures of the HALT Act work, and which policies and procedures don't. And I think that's what should have been going on going forward. We've created a great law. We now need to get into the jail and see how it's doing and see what changes we can make for the betterment of correction officers, the staff, and for inmates.
And Judge Wolfgang, you have sentenced many criminals in your time on the bench.
Yes, a lot of times the implementation, the good intentions don't end up the way they were really intended. The implementation changes everything, and that's really what Mr. Fogg was saying too. We have to find out how they're going to, the other parts of the HALT Act that were not implemented, such as mental hygiene, help, and other help. Also, this brought to the forefront a very big issues regarding corrections officers, not only their lifestyle, but the inadequate funding that they need, the staffing rather, funding, all the issues that corrections officers are facing. All of this kind of was brought to the forefront during this time period, and I think it will end up, it probably will end up with a good result that all the parties will be heard, both sides will be heard, and probably the law will be amended if it has to be in any way to benefit both parties.
Well, believe it or not, we're almost at the end of our show, but I'll give you a few minutes to think about your closing thoughts. And after the break, we're going to continue our conversations with our experts on this issue.
Hello, Buffalo. I'm Ed Asner. You may remember me as television's no-nonsense news director Lou Grant. And if you think about it, journalists provide us with our first draft of history. Right here in Buffalo, more than 50 years of TV news coverage is being brought back to life. Local stations are working with the Buffalo Broadcasters Association to bring back the stories that helped define the Niagara frontier.
The Pheasant Lane neighborhood, where drifts reach to the rooftops.
It's called the Archive Project, and I support it with all my heart. So should you.
Experience Buffalo and Erie County's unique stories with the new Buffalo History Museum podcast. Connect with Western New York's history as you listen to detailed narratives about heritage, architecture, business, innovation, and significant events and people throughout time. The podcast takes inspiration from the museum's collection and beyond, from experts on staff and featured guests. From the 1918 influenza to F. Scott Fitzgerald, experience the stories that make up our region. The Buffalo History Museum podcast. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Broadcasting Buffalo. I'm Mike Igo. We're here with our guests talking about the prison strikes in New York State. We have some final closing thoughts from our guest. Robert, go ahead, please.
I believe the parties will come to an agreement, and I think this will be for the betterment, but I don't want it to overshadow any of the actions or things that have happened in the prisons, especially the one death that has occurred.
And Jerome, you've obviously been watching this issue very closely. Your final thoughts, please.
Yeah, during the strike, 7 people died, 2 by suicide, 1 by a beating again. The culture of violence that's being perpetuated, it doesn't get talked about. Safety begins with everybody being safe, and incarcerated people right now are not safe. The law is being broken, and they need to follow the law. Simple as that.
Do you think the strike had the impact that they had hoped?
Obviously, it is having. I don't know what they wanted. You know why? Because they had opportunity during their negotiations for the contract to bring this up, and they did not. So I don't know what they wanted. I do know what this was about. Again, a subterfuge to take off the cover of that Robert Brooks murder that was shown on video that many of us who've been incarcerated know happens much too often. That doesn't make a safe environment for incarcerated people. I don't know when incarcerated lives did not matter anymore, because that's what it seems like now. We're talking about the officers, and people are dying in there, and it's not officers dying.
Sure.
So whose safety is really at risk?
Judge Penny, we have 2 minutes for your final thoughts.
I'm thinking that all of the issues that we raised are important, and it's good that we had an opportunity to bring this to the public's attention, whether it was because of a terrible incident that you were referring to, that this law was passed, the strike of corrections officers, which is unheard of and a violation of the Taylor Act. All of this, I think, is very good for the people, the general public, because we wouldn't be talking about these issues. They wouldn't be knowing what Holt meant, what solitary confinement meant, even what the Taylor Act meant, unless these actions were taken. So now people are talking about it, and as we pointed out, it's going to have a good resolution, and maybe either the law will be changed, or the law will be amplified, or it will be followed as it was intended to be. But either way, I think it's going to be, the end result is going to be positive of all of the actions that have happened.
Well, thank you all for sharing your thoughts with us today. Even the old professors learned something today. Amazing. And thanks again for stopping by. And we'd like to thank you for joining us for Broadcasting Buffalo. I'm Mike Igo, and we invite you to join us every single week at this time right here where you're watching. Thanks very much, and have a good night, everybody.